2020 was terrible. Forest fires to a pandemic, lockdowns to George Floyd, 2020 has definitely left its mark on the modern day world. Now, dates and time are all arbitrary. Things don't just reset because a new year has begun. Some of these problems have left damage and greater threats may emerge. Now, these threats should be taken with a grain of salt in terms of speculation, as this list is based on impact and likelihood. Now, I'm Lewis from the Thinking Bubble, and this is the top 10 biggest threats in 2021. Number 10. Extreme weather. As we saw in the beginning of January 2020, Australia had forest fires. Now, granted, the weather wasn't the only thing that caused or enhanced the damage, but it was definitely a contributing factor. The cost of the tragedy came well over 103 billion Australian dollars, and these extreme weather events don't just affect the pockets of the government, it affects a lot more, such as loss of human life, damage to ecosystems, and destruction of property. Is this something that will be repeated in 2021? Number 9. Failure to comply with climate change. Nobody is immune to climate change. Not you, not me, not even the leaders of the world. Now, although lockdowns had aided in the cause against climate change by lowering emissions to fall in the first half of 2020, evidence from the 2008 and 2009 financial crisis warns that emissions will bounce back. A shift towards greener economies really can't be delayed until this pandemic subsides. Number 8. Human environmental damage. You're seeing a trend here, right? While minor things in our minds, like littering, seems a bit far-fetched into thinking it has a large-scale impact on the world, when in reality, if everyone littered, it all adds up. Not just littering either, but deforestation continues to cause damage to the planet. In addition, deregulation of protected areas, industrial accidents, oil spills, all damage ecosystems, and then, in general, damage the well-being of the planet. Number 7. Infectious diseases. Now, if you didn't know, there was a pandemic last year. Some people didn't get the memo.
Hi, Mr. Wayne. Didn't you get the memo?
Don't worry. Now, while it's left its mark on the world, it continues to run rampant. I would even suggest that the disease on its own isn't necessarily the worry, but rather how humans have managed it. Uncontrolled contagion of infectious diseases will result in what we already know as economic disruption and a loss of life. Number 6. Severe mental health deterioration. During lockdowns, many individuals were forced to stay in their homes and limit their interactions with their loved ones, even over holidays like Christmas. Mental health issues like anxiety, dementia, and stress will negatively impact well-being, social cohesion, and productivity. The likelihood of this one is
it's looking, very, very likely.
Definitely on the upper end unless something is done quickly. Number 5. Asset bubble burst in large economies. This one's a bit of an outsider, but I feel like it needs to be mentioned. In the UK specifically, housing prices continue to rise and there is no sign of it stopping. A reason for this happening is basically because prices are just rising faster than wages. Investment funds and shares in an economy can burst at any moment, which could result in these aspects being disconnected from the real economy. Number 4. Weapons of mass destruction. Now, on paper, you can definitely see how this would leave the planet in ruins. The likelihood of a nuclear weapon being deployed is very, very little. With more and more countries having access to nuclear weapons, it's not necessarily the bomb itself that poses the threat. Of course, the damage, as mentioned earlier, cannot be understated, but the already long-term effects on diplomacy and relationships between these countries has been apparent for decades. This is only going to continue for years to come. Number 3. Digital inequality. Digital inequality is increasing massively within and between countries. There is a growing gap of technological advances of haves and have-nots. This leads to amid pressure on public and private finances to limit critical investments in digital education. This ultimately impedes individual economic mobility. Number 2, narrowing pathway for the youth. Lockdowns cause a massive disturbance in young people's education, and it has trickled onto the early stages of January. This will likely lead to future struggling students and an increase in dropout rates. Young students are expected to face increased debt burdens as student loans continue to rise to record levels. In addition, graduates are also expected to earn less than their peers. The 2008 to 2009 financial crisis shows the persistence of unemployment of the youth and the struggle to integrate and align their skills into the grim job market. 2020 has definitely shown the youth's vulnerability to widespread economic and societal shocks. Number 1, a debt crisis. According to the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, developed and developing countries with weak public finances will face a harder road to recovery. Corporate or public finances have been overwhelmed by debt accumulation, especially in large economies, resulting in mass bankruptcies, defaults, insolvency, liquidity crisis, and ultimately a sovereign debt crisis. In addition, if a country has a debt crisis, you can easily expect unemployment rates to increase, GDP per capita to fall, and poverty to increase. And there we have it, the very morbid threats to 2021. I hope you have a good year.